So I actually wanted to pick up on the case of CarX Street. I have not heard as of late, but I did some rummaging around inside of YT, and I was searching through for some videos, and eventually I came up to this interesting piece where the CarX Street Beta has actually been released. The only issue is that the game is fully released inside of the iOS devices. And then again, it's a beta build, so we really don't know what we're going to be picking up on as far as I'm concerned. And at a technical rate, I wouldn't say that this is a finalized version of the game overall, since CarX Technologies did state once before that they were actually going to release it on the PC first, instead of the iOS and or Android devices that we know of as of today. So before I actually get into this in-depth video so far, I actually want to state out these things. One thing for certain, this footage is not really mine. And this is considering the fact since I don't really have an iOS device to be recording the gameplay through the phone. I have an Android, which is a Nokia as far as I'm concerned. Number two is that certain recording devices within either Android or iOS would not push into my favor, considering the fact either there's just too many restrictions or the companies that made these recording sites for these devices are actually lazy to do a certain thing that would intrigue us to use these apps more. But that never even came to be the case. Now, I do want to give big credit to Twisted Oreo for making these 3 videos that I'm gonna show inside of this video all together and prove out some things that are gonna come up eventually into the game, as far as I am concerned, based on how I am seeing it for this game. And of course, it's on iOS, but still, it relies to be the case. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First video by Twisted Oreo, let's go ahead and get over with the gameplay as to what we can currently see. Now, basically what we all know so far is that it's pretty much the same thing as to CarX Drifts 1 and 2 and online in general, but there's actually a few additions within this beta so far, but we really don't know if they're actually going to be confirmed within the gameplay as a whole. Feature number 1 that is to eventually come into this game. Now, if you take a closer look on the upper right of the RPM gauge, you'll bound to see a smaller gauge called N2O, in which case in this case it's going to be the nitrous gauge overall. And the way I'm thinking is that CarX Technologies is actually going to bring the nitrous mechanic into one of their free roam IPs. Now, interestingly enough, this will give us somewhat like a Need for Speed vibe as to Need for Speed Underground or Most Wanted or the Carbon, that we were able to use nitrous inside of free roam. Well, kind of, but the nitrous mechanic system will not basically be the same thing as anticipated as far as I'm concerned. It hasn't been confirmed yet by CarX Technologies if we are able to at least upgrade a nitrous kit or install a nitrous kit when we level up through the progression of this game, buy it with some in-game currency, and then be able to use it. But if we were to use it, we don't know what kind of mechanics there would be in order to refill it. Either it's possible enough that we might need to refill it when we're at the garage to pay to refill the whole entire thing, or we need to swap out nitrous kits, or that we need to do some stunt driving or just normal driving in general, much like some of the older Need for Speed games. I'm just not too certain what possibly will happen if we need to refill our nitrous inside of this game as a whole. Because if you think about it, I really don't want it to be something like Need for Speed Heat, where, I mean, yeah, the nitrous automatically refills on its own. But the main issue is, I'm just hoping for the nitrous mechanic that we're given a chance to either tap down or even to hold down our button to use the nitrous, because realistically it resembles that realistic feel if you actually control the nitrous on your own certain point of view, instead of having to tap one single button and then the nitrous is instantly being used. That's what I'm thinking that should happen if we are to eventually use nitrous inside of this game. Now, with the nitrous gauge or N2O to exist inside of this game, it will become evident enough that this will be, if not mistaken, the very first CarX Technologies' free roam racing game to ever use nitrous, as far as I'm concerned. But the question is if it is an upgradable nitrous system. That's the main concern right there. Now, given on the steady analysis within this footage, feature number 2, right next to the N2O gauge and within the RPM gauge, I am able to see this fuel gauge within the RPM gauge as mentioned. So what does that really mean to me, if some of you may ask that question? To answer that good question of yours, it's actually going to be interesting enough that we're gonna be able to simulate driving cars with a fuel system. Because if you think about it, we need at least a game. We haven't gotten a game, at least, that has got that kind of system to be involved within the racing game genre, plus with the free roam gameplay as well. I mean, if you look at Need for Speed Underground 2, it does have free roam, however, it was missing the fuel system. I mean, it's an older game, so what could I expect? The same could apply for Most Wanted 2005 and the Carbon, even though those games really don't need a fuel system. I mean, let's be honest, not all games need a fuel system per se, but it would be interesting enough to show that form of realism from the real world into a racing game as a whole. I mean, surely enough, Forza Horizon, last I checked in Horizon 3, you were able to simulate how much fuel you were actually using if you put simulation damage on. But even though if you run out of gasoline inside that game, your engine does not even stop. Like, it doesn't shut off when it's out of gas. And whenever you go to a gas station, you're not even able to refuel your car. That's the main thing right there. However, with CarX Technologies currently working on this game, it might be evident enough that the fuel system might come into all of the other consoles, maybe even on the PC port as far as I'm concerned, where you could actually simulate how much gas you use, and that you could actually go to the gas station and use some of your in-game currency to actually purchase the gas if needed, after doing either a normal circuit or a sprint race, or even do some drifting around. It might later be the case as far as I am concerned. So this is my theory right here. This might be, if I'm not mistaken, the very first street racing game with free roam that is to ever simulate a fuel system overall. That is at least my thinking so far. But if some of you want to come up with a counter as to this theory, feel free to leave a comment down below to tell me what racing game with free roam was the very first game to simulate a fuel system overall. Feature number 3, and really I have to say that this really isn't new, but we're about to get an open world free roam map of Sunset City, much like we did so on other titles before CarX Technologies came up to be the case and decided to make CarX Street exist eventually at one point. And I'm saying this had happened inside of Need for Speed Underground 2, Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, Need for Speed Carbon, and Need for Speed, probably I would say, Rivals. Need for Speed Rivals, Need for Speed 2015, Need for Speed Payback, Need for Speed Heat. There's a lot of free roam racing games that actually has this. Even the Horizon series had this as well. Though taking a closer look, we're not only dealing with races. There are various different locations, such as gas stations, houses, a paint shop, and even either a performance and or body kit / rim shop, as far as I am concerned. And by looks, we're going to be dealing with a lot of places to go to in either the hillside or the main parts of Sunset City inside of this game as a whole. And there's I'm just saying that because it looked like there's plenty of places within the game to go to and explore within. And really, it isn't just by the clarity of these places by legend as to what they are, it's also the clarity as to how separate they are in various different locations within all of Sunset City within this game. That's actually an interesting thing that I have not seen before, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to certain free roam street racing games, in my certain point of view. And looking at the environment within this game, as far as I'm concerned, even though that some things are going to be appearing, this is still the beta state of the game. I feel like the atmosphere within this game, the ambience, even though it's either day, dusk, or even nighttime, whether you're drifting or just normally racing your cars, I just feel like the atmosphere inside this game is actually going to feel amazing at one certain point of view, given on these certain landscapes we get to see within the game. Not just the city parts as far as I am concerned, as we mostly see inside of a racing game as a whole. That's a given right there, if you get what I'm going with. Now, I'm not just saying for us to see it, but if CarX Technologies has the time to do so, to make off-road vehicles for us to drive it. I mean, there may not be a lot of landscapes for us to drive on, but I mean, it could still be interesting within the gameplay as a whole. But still, overall, the game does look beautiful with a lot of these, with this kind of atmosphere that has been put into the game, and still a work in progress as far as I'm concerned. The next video by Twisted Oreo for this game is basically him showing through the car list as per. Now, evidently enough, it's actually a small car list that exists since it is on its beta state, but as I mentioned, it is possible that the developers will actually be adding more cars for us to see, drive, and even modify within the game as far as tension goes. As of now, we're just not too certain since it's still in development as of today until we reach to September the 8th as of this year. Now, given by this, I think it's pretty cool enough for us to see that there's a small car list to start off. It kind of feels like Need for Speed Underground 2 when you have a small set of cars, but then again, you want to keep in mind that it probably will become evident that the main development studio, CarX Technologies, will actually be updating this game once they have actually released the game overall on September the 8th, the final build of CarX Street. They'll try to do a few updates and try to share the IP to different kinds of devices, this being the case to Android devices and pretty much to the consoles, whether they be PS4 or Xbox One. Probably more likely to the PS5 and or Xbox Series XS. That's what I know as far as I'm concerned. Not saying that this is going to be accurate though, but it is a possibility that could come up to be the case when the game is finished through development, and that the main studio itself is actually putting time to add some new stuff within the game in general. And I'm saying between the changes of games when it comes to new updates, whether the landscape has been adjusted and or modified a bit, or whether new features are going to be eventually coming up and which ones are going to be removed inside this game, or what new cars that CarX Technologies are planning to add into this game in general. Now, what could be a given is that CarX Technologies might add in the cars that have previously existed on the previous IPs, whether that be like CarX Highway Racing, CarX Drift Online, CarX Drift 2, and CarX Drift 1, or even CarX Rally as far as I'm concerned. Or they could actually model newer vehicles that they haven't done so before and add them into this game in general. I really don't know. It's just up to the studio themselves to decide. And it might be given since it's not really on the map inside of the beta build of this game, at least by the footage I'm seeing. There possibly is a car dealership. That is, unless our house becomes the car dealership itself for us to buy vehicles we haven't bought before, as far as I am concerned. Now, with video footage 2 out of the way as well, let's get going straight towards video footage number 3. Footage number 3 by Twisted Oreo is the upgrade systems. What we're looking at here is a mass amount of upgrades and engine swaps we can put into the car. Now, if we take a closer look at CarX Drift 2, our tuning is a lot more different. This is the same thing as CarX Drift 1 for mobile devices and CarX Drift Online. Even though the CarX Drift Online has engine swaps, if I'm not mistaken, It's using these sliders to actually modify the vehicles overall based on how well it could drift within the corner, either the responsiveness of the car or even how much tire pressure you need and how much performance you put overall. Instead of that system, CarX Street is actually using an alternate mean of performance parts overall. And I say this because CarX Street is actually giving you a variety of performance parts you could change overall to your car to improve the performance on your engine, transmission, suspension, tires, and even brakes inside of the vehicle as a whole. Not just providing some engine swaps as far as I am concerned. And it might be possible that tuning sliders will return back, but the thing is, it will not be the same as to CarX Drift 1, 2, and even online, as far as I am concerned. And the way I see this menu, I'm just lost in words. I mean, this is actually amazing. This is much more bigger than anticipated. I only wish that Black Box would have done something like this. I mean, they've done a lot of crazy stuff, but this is definitely the evolutionization of Black Box Studios in some way, instead of Ghost Games. Ghost Games is just a joke. I mean, how do you expect Ghost Games to be better than Black Box Studios if they can't even make a good Need for Speed game, for one? But overall, the customization, the modification process inside this game, it has some type of way. And by God, how this looks, it's actually realistically amazing as to how CarX Street is putting all the time and effort to make all this possible, not just the whole entire game itself as a whole. And all I could say when it comes to performance inside of a street racing game, this overall is somewhat like Need for Speed Underground 2, maybe Most Wanted to the Carbon, or even Underground 1, or even Undercover in some kind of way, only that it's been pushed even further than that. But then again, people have their own opinions on what they think, so I really can't tell them what is right or what is wrong. They have their own personal opinions overall. And just because I say that does not really mean it's gonna be the best overall. However, I do have to say this is really good. The only reason why I wouldn't say it's really the best of all time is considering the fact as to how certain modifications in this game, if this is possible, will wear out, and if you need to find a replacement. That is, if CarX Technologies is up to the task to making realisticality for performance parts overall possible, much like Street Legal Racing Redline. Not to say that they will, but it is possible. It's just up to the studios themselves. And with this being said, it's possible that CarX Technologies might have some competition out there when it comes to racing games with a massive amount of car customization and modification and simulation overall. But it isn't really with the bigger studios, much like Turd 10 Studios when it comes to Forza Horizon series, or even EA Games when it comes to the development of Need for Speed. No, it's going to be with much more smaller, different companies and or studios at the time being. And that's only being said unless CarX Technologies is actually a massive game development studio overall, or a company for that matter. But yeah, no, beta, as far as I'm concerned, based on this analysis overall, as I mentioned, we might be able to simulate the gameplay using a fuel system where we go in and drive around inside of the game, eventually needing to put some gasoline in the car. We stop at a gas station and then we end up refueling the car. Then again, the cost of refueling the car has to be in-game currency, much simulated to the real world as far as I am concerned. That is a given right there. To be honest, another thing about this game is the landscaping. Not only that the landscaping of the city is actually going to be amazing as a whole inside of this game, I'm also thinking about looking into the landscapes in the outside parts of the city. It might look even more so interesting than what we have as to other games. And those are other games that are not even made by CarX Technologies. I'm talking about Need for Speed and the Forza Horizon series as a whole, and probably even Midnight Club. Well, mainly Midnight Club Los Angeles, because that's the only game that Rockstar Games have made up to the point so far as we know it. but still, it rests to be my case. But then again, the landscapes probably will not be anywhere matched against Forza Horizon or Turn 10 Studios' title so far, but still, they're still amazing. Our selection list within this game is actually small, and that's a given for the start of the game once it's done with development probably. But even if it is to be the case, it will be possible enough that CarX Technologies will be adding in more cars inside of CarX Street overall. I mean, they're pulling it off like like a Forza Horizon game, where Turn 10 Studios updates their game by putting new cars in that has not been mentioned before inside of any other Forza games, or probably have been but haven't returned for quite a while, are actually being added to the Forza line. CarX Technologies might do something like that. However, I'm not too certain if they are actually doing it the way that Turn 10 Studios would do as far as I'm concerned. Hell, it's even getting updates more than Need for Speed Heat. And that's because it's been 2 years since Need for Speed Heat has ever gotten an update. I mean, surely enough, it wasn't Ghost Games' fault that they couldn't make updates. However, it was their fault because they made bad games. Henceforth, why EA shut them down in the first place, because they were not making any good sales overall. And the updates might not even affect just adding new cars and customization options into the game for those new cars. Some of the landscapes, I'm pretty certain that it will be possible that the landscape will change during the time as well. I'm just not too certain if it's going to be possible or not. But then again, as mentioned, we still do not know what CarX Technologies is actually doing so far in regards to the new development of the game and the aftermath of the game in September the 8th. So that's for them to decide on their own, given by their own standpoint. However, if this were to be the case, and if let me think of it. If CarX Technologies, a small game development studio inside of Russia, were to kick EA and Turn 10's ass, they'd be completely humiliated by being beaten by a smaller studio for one street racing game that is actually simulated. I mean, that'd be a funny joke if it really did happen. But then again, it's their decision based on what they think they should or shouldn't do. Henceforth, I'm not even going to go mentioning that they are going to go straight towards challenging both of those companies and or one of those companies per se. And it's their decision to do what they should or shouldn't do, considering the fact that their decision is that they should continue developing this game until September 8th, in which case I have not given up hope yet, because so far we were supposed to get it last year, but I completely understand. They still wanted to finish the game, and that's why they decided to delay it even further. I mean, this is a critical standpoint inside of the racing games as a whole, if you think about it so far, because you see, both EA and Turn 10 Studios, when it comes to making racing games, it's like they show no patience as to developing a racing game as a whole. Henceforth, they just give out a tight deadline, don't even bother to have delays for the game, and it just comes out, it's a complete mess. Meanwhile, we got CarX Technologies making these games, and they're still taking their time as much as they like to make this game possible, CarX Street as a whole. Now, I noticed that there was some people that have gave up on the studio because of this stupidity, but the thing is, this stupidity actually makes sense, because let me ask you this: when was the last time in pretty much generation, I probably would say like 2 or 1 decade ago, when was the last time we've ever had a proper racing game where there was like minimum to no bugs and or glitches inside of a game and that had good content? I'm pretty certain the last time we've actually got a good Need for Speed game was pretty much around like Hot Pursuit or even Undercover. Even though Undercover wasn't really the best game out there, it still did good in some type of way. And, well, Forza Horizon, they screwed up on Horizon 5 somehow. They released it early. That's my main issue right there. And by they, I mean Turn 10 Studios. It's that obvious. And I say it's a critical standpoint because you need a lot of time and effort to be put if you were to create a racing game as a whole to actually make a proper working, functioning racing game. The failures that I've seen so far that has never gone into this perspective at all would be Need for Speed 2015, Need for Speed Payback, Need for Speed Heat, Super Street the game, even though it died real quickly. It died way more quickly than Need for Speed Heat as far as I'm concerned. And Turn 10's this game that they messed up once in the lifetime of theirs, being Forza Horizon 5, because it's a buggy mess since the start of its initial release overall. Henceforth, taking the time you need necessarily to develop a racing game is much more important than just rushing the whole entire thing and going by your day to think that the game is actually going to be good. No, that isn't to be the case as far as I'm concerned. And this is me saying from my thought process in general in regards to open world, free roam, street racing related video games as a whole. Now the logical explanations are almost, well, pretty much done as of this point. I want to state out what I really want to say on my mind, and this is throughout my experience of playing games. I may not be a video game developer, but I think it actually makes sense as a whole. Realistically, I have hope. I really have hope on CarX Technologies. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're going to be the best. There's going to be other game studios out there that are going to try to compete against it. I mean, EA, they can't really compete against EA or Turn 10 in regards to them being much more bigger studios. But I have hope that they'll do very good in the future, where they will become the next most successful video game studio, then eventually to become a video game company that makes really good racing games in general. And I'm just saying because based on how they're actually making these games, it's actually interesting because they're taking the time they need to actually get the gameplay physics and mechanics the way they want it to be, which was support the realism as much as possible. And they try to use the realistic kind of cars, except rename them to a fictional name rather than just trying to use the actual licensed car in the real world. And overall, all of this stuff that we're getting right here, I'm hoping, like, I have high hopes that CarX Technologies is not going to pull out an EA or a Rockstar Games to either have stuff for pay to win or even just add DLCs or just make a ridiculous currency making system by having their customers pay money just to buy in-game currency overall. Like, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I mean, if you know me, I had said this once before, probably a few times. I may have not, but I can assume so. That I hate this kind of system. I hate how these game studios are working their way to just try to find cheap ways to make money. They're doing way more better on making game sales in the previous years than what they are doing now because of all these in-game currencies and DLCs and stuff like that. I mean, hopefully when this game releases on the consoles and the PC, I hope the main thing that CarX Street or CarX Technologies is going to be focusing on CarX Street overall probably will not be the in-game purchases that much, and most likely probably not even the DLCs as much, but overall the game sales. Because when you think about it, even though the in-game purchases and DLCs give you a massive amount of money to be made, I still think that the video game sales are way more important than what you put inside this game just to get customers to buy all of this. And I mean, by doing all this, I mean trying to be a scummy game development studio and just try to make an in-game an in-game, in-purchase system for the game, and that could be like in-game currencies, DLCs, probably even subscriptions. Because if you haven't noticed, Grand Theft Auto 5, Rockstar Games is introducing a Grand Theft Auto Plus, and as far as I'm concerned, as soon as I get through a few of other videos that I wanted to try to make gameplays out of, I will be explaining in the process as to all of this, as to how stupid this decision is eventually. However, this being said, we are actually in many years, since probably 2008 or 2009, or maybe even 2010, that we finally, at least for a decade, that we actually, or maybe even 2 decades, that we actually get a good game that we want the most. Well, it's not really what we want the most because it's not made by a massive company, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. Anyways, with that being said, my name is IceShadow01, and I just want to say I am really hoping for this game to come up. And also I want to share some things with CarX Technologies as to this game. So overall, if possible, could you please add in a beta version for the Android? Because realistically, I want to try the game out from my own perspective, and it just seems interesting to me that I wanted to know what it would be like for the first few minutes before I actually jump into the conclusion right away. I mean, overall, it's still going to feel like the same way as the other mobile games like CarX Drift 1 and CarX Drift 2. But I feel like it's way more bigger than anticipated, and realistically, I feel like this is way more than we could ever imagine CarX Technologies. Because I like racing games, and what you guys are showing me is realistically, and I'm being honest, it's realistically interesting to a point where I actually want to try to get this game someday in my laptop. But I mean, I just wanted to know if you could do that. I mean, if you don't want to, you don't have to. I'm not really forcing you to do it, but it would be an honor to actually try the beta out before we actually get the game. So that way you could see what it's like to play the game a little bit here and there on the phone before you start releasing the game eventually later on. Anyways, with this being said, I have high hopes, and damn it, I really am being honest. Let's just wait a little bit further, people. We are getting close to the game being finished as of this year. Because, like I said, well, probably not, but most likely, I said that they wanted to finish the game. They don't want to release it half finished, half-fast, which explains to me that this is the biggest project ever made, well, really made by a small studio. The biggest project, with a few delays, to get the game finished. And this is the first one out in a decade since we've ever gotten so for a racing game overall. Anyways, with that being said, my name is Ice Shadow. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like. Do share a comment if you do want to in regards to this game or whatever in general. And feel free to subscribe if you want to. You don't really have to if you don't want to. Anyways, with that being said, my name is IceShadow01, and I will see you on to the next episode. See ya.